Good morning. Page 198. We're on chapter 7 of part 3, volume 2. The way of life and customs of the natives. The natives of the archipelago. The sex. To describe the native life in all its outward monotony would seem to be both very easy and very readily attainable, yet it is very difficult at the same time. As with every different way of life, one has to describe the round of living from one morning until the next, from one winter to the next, from birth, arrival in one's first camp, until death, and simultaneously describe everything about all the many islands and islets that exist. No one is capable of encompassing all this, of course, and I would merely be a bore to read whole volumes. It would. And the life of the natives consists of work, or starvation, cold and cunning. This work, for those who are unable to push others out of the way and set themselves up in a soft spot, it's that self-same general work which raises socialism up out of the earth and drives us down into the earth. One cannot enumerate nor cover all the different aspects of this work, nor wrap your tongue around them. To push a wheelbarrow, the machine of the secret state security, 2 handles and 1 wheel. So, to carry hand barrels, to unload bricks barehanded, the skin quickly wears off the fingers. To haul bricks on one's own body by goat in a shoulder barrow. To break up stone and coal in quarry and mine. To dig clay and sand. To hack out 8 cubic yards of gold-bearing ore with a pick and haul them to the screening apparatus. Yes, and just to dig in the earth, just to chew up earth, flinty soil, and in the winter, to cut coal underground, and there are ores there too, lead and copper. Yes, one can also pulverize copper ore, a sweet taste in the mouth, and one waters at the nose. One can impregnate ties with creosote and one's whole body at the same time too, and one can carve out tunnels for railroads and build roadbeds. One can dig peat in the bog up to one's waist in the mud. One can smelt ores. One can cast metal. One can cut hay on hummocks in swampy meadows, sinking up to one's ankles in water. One can be a stableman or a drayman, yes, and steal oats from the horse's bag for one's own pot, but the horse is government issue. The old grass bag, and she'll last it out, most likely, because you can drop dead, but you can drop dead. Yes, and generally, at the Salkozy, the agricultural camps, you can do every kind of peasant work, and there's no work better than that. You'll grab something from the ground for yourself. But the father of all is our Russian forest with its genuinely golden tree trunks. Gold is mined from them, and the oldest of all the kinds of work in the archipelago is logging. It summons everyone to itself and has room for everyone, and it's not even out of bounds for cripples. They will send out a 3-man gang of armless men to stamp down the foot and have snow. Snow comes up to your chest. You're a lumberjack. First, you yourself stamp down next to the tree trunk. You cut down the tree. Then, hardly able to make your way through the snow, you cut off all the branches, and you have to feel them out in the snow and get to them with your axe, still dragging your way through the same loose snow. You have to carry off all the branches and make piles of them and burn them. They smoke, they don't burn. And now you have to saw up the wood to size and stack it. And the work norm for you and your brother for the day is 6.5 cubic yards each, or 13 cubic yards for 2 men working together. In Averbakh, the norm was 9 cubic yards, but the thick pieces had to be split into blocks. By then, your arms would not be capable of lifting an axe, nor your feet of moving. During the war years, on war rations, the camp inmates called 3 weeks at logging dry execution. You come to hate this forest, this beauty of the earth, whose praises have been sung in verse and prose. You come to walk beneath the arches of pine and birch with a shudder of revulsion. For decades in the future, you will only have to shut your eyes to see those same fir and aspen trunks which you have hauled on your back to the freight car, sinking into the snow and falling down, and hanging onto them tight, afraid to let go lest you prove unable to lift it out of the snowy mesh. Work at hard labor in Tsarist Russia was limited for decades by the normative statutes of 1869, which were actually issued for free persons. In assigning work, the physical strength of the worker and the degree to which he was accustomed to it were taken into consideration. Can one nowadays really believe that the workday was set at 7 hours in winter and 12.5 hours in summer? At the ferocious Akatui hard labor center, Yakubovich, in the 1890s, the work norms were easily fulfilled by everyone except him. The summer workday there amounted to 8 hours, including walking to and from work, and from October on, 7 hours, and in winter only 6. And this was even before any struggle for the universal 8-hour workday. As for Dostoevsky's hard labor in Omsk, it is clear that in general they simply loafed about, as any reader can establish. The work there was agreeable and went with the swing. And the prison administration there even dressed them up in white linen jackets and trousers. Now, how much further could they have gone? In our camps, they used to say you could even put on a white collar, which meant things were very, very easy, and there was absolutely nothing to do. And they had even white jackets. After work, the hard labor convicts of the House of the Dead used to spend a long time strolling around the prison courtyard. That means they were not totally fagged out. Indeed, the Tsarist censor did not want to pass the manuscript of the House of the Dead for fear that the easiness of the life depicted by Dostoevsky would fail to deter people from crime. And so Dostoevsky added new pages for the censor which demonstrated that life in hard labor was nonetheless hard. In our camps, only the trustees went strolling around on Sundays. Yes, and even they hesitated to. And Shalamov remarks, with respect to the notes of Maria Volkonskaya, that the Decemberist prisoners in Nerchinsk had a norm of 118 pounds of ore to mine and load each day. 118 pounds. One could lift all that at once. Whereas Shalamov on the Kolyma had a work norm of per day of 28,800 pounds. And Shalamov writes that in addition their summer workday was sometimes 16 hours long. I don't know how it was with 16, but for many it was 13 hours long on earth-moving work in GULag at the northern logging operations. And these were hours on the job itself, over and above the 3 miles walk to the forest and 3 back. And anyway, why should we argue about the length of the day? After all, the work norm would senior in length to the length of the workday, senior in rank to the length of the workday. And when the brigade didn't fulfill the norm, the only thing that was changed at the end of the shift was a convoy, and the works loggers were left there in the woods by the light of searchlights until midnight, so that they got back to the camp just before morning, in time to eat their dinner, along with their breakfast, and go out to the woods again. There's no one to tell about that either. They all died. And then there's another way they raised the norms and provided it was possible to fulfill them. In cold lower than 60 degrees below zero, workdays were written off. In other words, on such days, the records showed that the workers had not gone out to work, but they chased them out anyway, and whatever they squeezed out of them on those days was added to other days, thereby raising the percentages. And the servile medical section wrote off those who froze to death on such cold days on some other basis. And the ones who were left could no longer walk, were straining with every sinew to crawl along on all fours on the way back to the camp. The convoy simply shot, so that they wouldn't escape before they could come back to get them. And how did they feed them in return? They poured water into a pot, and the best one might expect is that they would drop unscrubbed small potatoes into it, but otherwise black cabbage, beet tops, all kinds of trash, or else vetch or bran. They didn't begrudge these, and wherever there was a freshwater shortage, or a water shortage, as there was at the Samarkand camp near Karaganda, only 1 bowl of gruel was cooked a day, and they also gave out a ration of 2 cups of turbid salty water. Everything was good. Everything any good was always and without fail stolen for the chiefs. See Chapter 9. For the trustees and for the thieves, the cooks were all terrorized, and it was only by submissiveness that they kept their jobs. Certain amounts of fat and meat subproducts, in other words, not real food, were signed out from the warehouses, as were fish, peas, and cereals, but not much of that ever found its way into the mouth of the pot. And in remote places, the chiefs even took all the salt for themselves, for their own pickling. In 1940, on the Kotlas-Vorkuta Railroad, both the bread and the gruel were unsalted. The worse the food, the more of it they gave the Czechs. They used to give them horse meat from exhausted horses driven to death for work. And even though it was quite impossible to chew it, it was a feast. Ivan Dobryak recalls today, quote, "In my own time, I have pushed no small amount of dolphin meat into my mouth. Also walrus, seal, sea bear, and all kinds of other sea animal trash. I interrupted we ate whale meat in Moscow at the Kaluga gates. I was not even afraid of animal feces. As for the willow herbs, lichens, wild chamomile, they were the very best of dishes. This means he himself went out and added this to his rations. It was impossible to try to keep nourished on GULag norms. Anyone who worked out in the bitter cold for 13 or even 10 hours. And it was completely impossible once the basic ration had been plundered. And this was where Frankel's satanic mixing paddle was put into the boiling pot. Some sloggers would be fed at the expense of others. The pots were divvied up, if less than 30% of the norm, and in each different camp this was calculated in a different way. If less than 30% of the norm was fulfilled, the ration issued you was a punishment ration, 10.5 ounces of bread and a bowl of gruel a day. For from 30 to 80% of the norm, they issued penalty ration of 14 ounces of bread a day and 2 bowls of gruel. And from 81 to 100%, you got a work ration from 17.5 ounces to 21 of bread and 3 bowls of gruel. And after that came the shock workers' pots, and they differed among themselves, running 24.5 to 31.5 ounces of bread and supplementary kasha portions, 2 portions. And the bonus dish, which was some kind of dark, bitterish rye dough fingers stuffed with peas. And for all this watery food, which could not possibly cover what the body expended, the muscles burned up, a body-rending toil, the shock workers and the Stakhanovites went into the ground sooner than did the malingerers. This was something the old camp veterans understood very well. And it was covered by their own saying, better to give me an extra kasha and not wake me up for work. If such a happy stroke of fortune befalls you as to be allowed to stay on your bunk for lack of clothing, you'll get the guaranteed 21 ounces. If they have dressed you for the season, and this is a famous GULag expression, in taking you out to work on the canal, even if you wear your sledgehammer down to a chisel, you'll never get more than 10.5 ounces out of the frozen soil. But the Zek was not at liberty to stay on his bunk. Of course, they did not feed the Zeks so badly everywhere and always. But these are typical figures in crossway in wartime. At Vol.2 in the same time period, the miners' ration was in all likelihood the highest in all of GULag, because heroic Moscow was being heated with that coal. It was 45.5 ounces for 80% of the norm underground and 100% on the surface. And in that mostly horribly murderous, tsarist, hard labor academy on a non-working day spent on the bunk, they used to give out 2.5 Russian pounds of bread, 35 ounces, as well as 32 zolotniks, in other words, 4.65 ounces of meat. And on a working day they gave out 3 Russian pounds, 43 ounces of bread, and 48 zolotniks, 7 ounces of meat. Was that not maybe higher than the frontline ration in the Red Army? And the Akatwi prisoners carted off their gruel and their kasha by the tubful to the jailer's pigs. And P. Yakubovich found their thin porridge made from buckwheat kasha. GULag never ever saw that. Inexpressibly repulsive to the taste. Danger of death from malnutrition is something that never hung over the head of hard labor convicts of Dostoevsky's book. And what can you say? If geese went wandering around in the prison yard, in the camp compound, and the prisoners didn't wring their necks? Bread of the Tsarist Akatwi was settled on their tables unrestricted, and at Christmas they were given a pound of beef and unlimited butter. For their cereal on Sakhalin, the Tsarist prisoners working on roads and in mines during the months of the most work received each day 56 ounces of bread, 14 ounces of meat, 8 3/4 ounces of cereal. And the conscientious Chekhov investigated whether these norms were really even enough, or whether in the view of the inferior quality of the baking and cooking they fell short. And if he had looked into the bowl of our Soviet slogger, he would have given up the ghost right then and there. But imagination at the beginning of our century could have pictured that after 30 or 40 years, not just on the Sakhalin alone, but throughout the entire archipelago, prisoners would be so glad to get even more soggy, dirty, salt-baked bread. and admixtures of the devil. God only knew. The devil only knew what. And then 24.5 ounces of it would be an enviable shock worker ration. No, even more. Remember, the shock workers stayed early. It started early, stayed late, worked on the weekends. They were devoted communists. No, even more. That throughout all Russia, the collective farmers would even envy that prisoner's ration. We don't get even that after all. Even at the Tsarist Nerchinsk mines, they gave a supplementary gold prospector's payment for everything over the government norm, which was always moderate. In our camps, for most of the years of the archipelago, they either paid nothing for labor or just as much as was required for soap and tooth powder. Only in those rare camps and in those short periods, when for some reason they introduced cost accounting, and only from 1/8 to 1/4 of the genuine wage was credited to the prisoner, could Zex buy bread, meat, and sugar, and all of a sudden, oh astonishment, a crust would be left at the mess hall table, and it might be there for all of 5 minutes without anyone reaching out a hand to grab it. And how were our natives dressed and shod? All archipelagos are like all archipelagos are like all archipelagos. The blue ocean rolls about them, coconut palms grow on them, and the administration of the islands does not assume the expense of clothing. The natives go about barefoot and almost naked. But as for our cursed archipelago, it would have been quite impossible to picture it beneath a hot sun. It was eternally covered with snow, and the blizzards eternally raged over it. In addition to everything else, it was necessary to clothe and shoe all that horde of 10 to 15 million prisoners. Fortunately, born outside the bounds of the archipelago, the Zeks arrived here not altogether naked. They wore what they came in. More accurately, what the socially friendly elements might leave of it, except that as a brand of the archipelago, a piece had to be torn off, just as they clipped one ear of the ram. Greatcoats have their flaps cut off diagonally. The Denny helmets have the high peak cut off so as to leave a draft through the top. But alas, the clothing of free men is not eternal, and footwear can be in shreds in a week from the stumps and hummocks of the archipelago. And therefore it is necessary to clothe the natives. And even though they have nothing with which to pay for the clothing, someday the Russian stage will yet see the sight, and the Russian cinema screen. The pea jacket's one color, and their sleeves another, or so many patches on the pea jacket that its original cloth is totally invisible, or a flaming pea jacket with tatters on it like tongues of flame, or patches on breeches made from wrapping one's food parcel from home, wrappings of someone's food parcel from home, and for a long while to come, one can still read the address written in the corner with an indelible pencil. And on their feet the tried and true Russian lapti, bast sandals, except that they had no decent onuchi footcloths to go with them, or else they might have a piece of old automobile tire tied right on the bare foot with a wire and electric cord. Grief has its own inventiveness, or else there were felt boots, Berkey, put together from pieces of old torn-up padded jackets, with soles made of a layer of thick felt and a layer of rubber. In the morning at the gatehouse, hearing complaints about the cold, the chief of the camp would reply, with his GULag sense of humor, "My goose out there goes around barefoot all winter long and doesn't complain. Although it's true her feet are red, all of you have got rubber overshoes. And then, in addition, bronze-gray camp faces will appear on the screen, eyes oozing with tears, red eyelids, white cracked lips covered with sores, skewbald, unshaven bristles on the face, lip. In winter, a summer cap with ear flaps sewn on. I recognize you. It is you, the inhabitants of my archipelago. But no matter how many hours there are in a workday, sooner or later sloggers will return to the barracks. Their barracks. Sometimes it is a dugout dug into the ground, and in the north more often a tent, true, with the earth banked and reinforced, hit or miss with boards. Often there are kerosene lamps in place of electricity, but sometimes there are the ancient Russian splinter lamps, or else cotton wool wicks. In Ust-Fin, for 2 years, they saw no kerosene, and even in headquarters barracks, they got light from oil from the food store. It is by this pitiful light that we will survey this ruined world. Sleeping shelves in 2 stories, sleeping shelves in 3 stories, or as a sign of luxury, vagonki, multiple bunks with boards, most often bare, and nothing at all on them. On some of the work parties, they steal so thoroughly, and they sell the spoils through the free employees, that nothing government issue is given out, and no one keeps anything of his own in the barracks. They take both their mess tins and their mugs to work with them, and even tote the bags containing their belongings, and thus laden, they dig in the earth. Those who have them put their blankets around their necks, a film scene, or else lug their things to trusty friends in a guarded barracks. During the day, when the barracks are empty, as if uninhabited, at night they may turn over their wet clothes to be dried in the dryer, if there is a dryer. But undressed like that, you are going to freeze on the bare boards, and so they dry their clothes on themselves. At night, their caps may freeze to the wall of the tent, or in a woman's case, her hair. They even hide their best sandals under their heads, so they won't be stolen off their feet. Bir pollen during the war. In the middle of the barracks, there is an oil drum with holes in it, which has been converted into a stove, and it is good. And when it gets red hot, excuse me, then the steamy odor of drying footcloths permeates the entire barracks. But it sometimes happens that the wet firewood in it doesn't burn. Some of the barracks are so infested with insects that every 4 days fumigation with burning sulfur doesn't help. And when in the summer the Zeks go out to sleep on the ground in the camp compound, the bedbugs crawl after them and find them even there. And the Zeks boil the lice off their underwear in the mess tins after dining from them. Oh. All this became possible only in the 20th century, and comparison here with the prison chroniclers of the past century is to no avail. They didn't write of anything like this. It is necessary to add to all this the picture of the way the brigade's bread is brought on the tray from the cutting room into the mess hall under guard of the huskiest brigade members carrying staves. Otherwise, other prisoners will grab it, tear it apart, and run off with it. And the picture should also be added of the way food parcels from home are knocked out of the Zeks' hands at the very moment they leave the parcel office. And also the constant alarm whether the camp administration is going to take away the rest day. And why talk about the war if for a whole year before the war they had not one day off on the Upta State Farm, and no one in GULag could remember any rest days from 1937 right through to 1945. Then on top of everything, one has to add the eternal impermanence of camp life, the fear of change, rumors about a prisoner transport, the prisoner transport itself. The hard labor of Dostoevsky's time knew no prisoner transports, and for 10 or even 20 years people served out their terms in one prison, and that was a totally different kind of life. Then some sort of dark and sudden shuffling of contingents, either a transfer in the interest of production or of commissioning by a medical review board, or inventory of property, or sudden night searches that involve undressing and the tearing apart of all the prisoners' meager rags. And then beyond that, through thorough individual searches before the big holidays of May 1st and November 7th, the Christmas and Easter of hard labor in the past century knew nothing like this. And 3 times a month, there were the fatal, ruinous baths. To avoid repetition, I shall not write them down here. There's a detailed story, investigation in Shalamov, and the story by Dombrowski. And later, there was that constant clinging, and for intellectual torturing, lack of privacy, the conditioning of not being an individual, but a member of a brigade instead, and the necessity of acting for whole days and whole years, not as yourself have decided, but as the brigade requires. And one must remember as well that everything that has been said refers to the established camp in operation for some time. But that camp had to be started at some time, and by someone, and by whom, if not by our unhappy brother's ex, of course. They came to a cold, snowy woods. They stretched wire on the trees, and whoever managed to survive until the first barracks knew those barracks would be for the guard anyway. In November 1941, near the station of Rishati, Camp Number 1 of Kraslak was opened. Over a 10-year period, they increased to 17. They drove 250 soldiers there, removed from the army to strengthen it morally. They cut timber, they built log frames, but there was nothing to cover the roofs with, so they lived with iron stoves beneath the sky. The bread brought them was frozen, and they chopped it up with an axe and gave it out in handfuls, broken up, crushed up, crummy. Their other food was humpback salmon, heavily salted. It burned their mouths, and they eased the burning with snow. When you remember the heroes of the war of the fatherland, don't forget these. Now that is the way of life of my archipelago. Thank you for listening.